Hello there, and welcome to Sync Music Matters, a podcast that explores the beautiful relationship between music and the moving image. My name's Jim Hustert, and I'm your host on this journey, as each week I seek to explore the people and the process behind the best music in TV, film and games. I'm talking to composers, but I'm also talking to editors, supervisors, directors, and anyone else who's involved with the synchronous process of pairing audio and visual. Hello, listener. Thanks very much for tuning in. In a moment, I'm going to be chatting with Sam Stockham of Involved Publishing. But before I do, I would just like to ask you a very quick favour. Would you be kind enough to take 5-10 seconds just to rate and review this podcast? You can do it on Spotify, on Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts, and it just helps tell the algorithm that this podcast is worth listening to, and indeed helps the podcast reach as many people as possible. If you would, I'd be very, very grateful. Anyway, let's crack on with the show. Sam Stockham began his career in music at Columbia Records as an A&R assistant while studying for a music business degree. Post-university, he began working in commercial rights and business affairs for the BBC. He later joined Universal Production Music, where over 12 years he rose through the company to become head of music supervision. Whilst at UPM, he worked across all forms of media, syncing thousands of hours of music in film, TV and advertising, and building relationships with some of the biggest broadcasters, production companies and brands in the UK and around the world. In 2024, he joined independent music publisher Involved Publishing as their creative sync and licensing manager. As well as a publishing roster, he is also responsible for sync across the group's iconic Anjunabeats, Anjunadeep and Anjunachill. Sam, thanks for joining me.
Cheers, Jim. Thanks for having me.
So first question, if someone had asked you way back when you were growing up on the mean streets of Newton Abbot in Devon, if someone had asked you what would you like to be when you grow up, what would you have replied?
I think I was big sports, loved anything kind of sports related, so football, cricket, rugby. I did that for years, but probably the first time I actually really thought about what would I really want to do as a career. So I joined the Air Cadets when I was kind of like a teenager, and and I was very close to joining the RAF at one point. So I think that was kind of like a little random side quest I kind of went on through my teens and stuff. I was just kind of quite enjoyed that kind of idea of flying planes and I don't think I thought about it as the military so much, but more of just the kind of adventure and the fun of kind of doing anything like kind of air cadet related.
Yeah. Was Top Gun anything to do with that?
It very much was, and also I've probably watched, it might be one of my top 3 most watched films, because like sometimes when you're sitting at an airbase waiting to go for like a flying lesson or something like that, they just had Top Gun on repeat in the kind of like flying room, just, you know, you've got 14, 15-year-old kids just watching it back to back for about 6 hours whilst they wait for their turn to fly around for a bit. So
you've had flying lessons?
Yeah, very basic, you know, like little flying in like a Cessna, little 2-seater plane. But yeah, the amount of trust they give you as a 15, 16-year-old kid to fly a plane by yourself or with an instructor or anything like that was quite remarkable.
Wow. So what was it that prevented you becoming a Top Gun pilot?
Well, actually, I looked into it, and after a bit of a growth spurt, I was a bit too tall to be like a fighter pilot. And I think you could have gone on to be anything like mechanic or radar or anything like that. And but you know, watching too much Top Gun, you think you want to be a fighter jet pilot or anything like that. And being just over 6'2", I think at the time it wasn't kind of possible, or I kind of convinced myself it wasn't the right thing to do. But at the same time, I had this music thing going on in the background, and I think too much to my parents' delight, I took the kind of creative music route rather than joining the military.
Yeah, nice. It's funny. I seem to think there's a couple of people I've interviewed who also, I think both of those they were composers, but there was a strong link to Top Gun and being a fighter pilot. Paleontology's come up twice as well.
Nice. Yeah. I think also, if I didn't do music, my dad said archaeology. if you wanted to go and hunt around in the fields and dig up old Roman ruins or find out about dinosaurs or something like that, that would have been a cool kind of like different route I could have gone. But
was that anything to do with Indiana Jones?
No, that was more kind of old school British, like Time Team. Do you remember that with Tony Robinson?
Yeah, Tony Robinson.
Yeah, exactly. So I think he always thought that might be a cool thing. But I think, they're ultimately very happy I kind of went down the music route in the end.
Yeah. So what was that progression? What was that path from, obviously been very interested in sport, being in the cadets and dabbling with the idea or toying with the idea of the RAF. What's the path that led you to music?
I think it's kind of always been there in the background of my life. I think, my dad had a huge kind of like CD collection, everything from classical music, a bit of jazz, a bit of folk. His kind of like first really big passions was also like prog rock music. So he used to like kind of instill kind of all these old like Frank Zappas and Led Zeppelins and Judas Priests and all this kind of like that kind of 60s, 70s era of music. And then also my mum was really good at pushing me to just try everything. So I think in my primary school, they didn't have any kind of like musical kind of lessons or anything. And then she kind of went in and convinced them that, music would be a great kind of addition to the curriculum. So they brought in all these different kind of teachers to get kids to try like strings or brass or wind instruments and stuff. So I ended up taking up the violin for quite a young age, played that for a while. Played in orchestras and toured a bit with some orchestras and really enjoyed that. So it's always just kind of there and doing it. I just never really maybe thought of it as a job. I just kind of did it because it was fun. And then when I got to kind of middle teens, I, kind of started playing the drums and playing in bands. So I just think that's always kind of been in the kind of background of everything else I've done. Music's always been a pretty constant part of my life.
And at what point did it go from being purely hobby to potentially professional?
Good question. I'm not really. I think it was more, in that kind of like when you're at sixth form and you're kind of deciding, what do you want to do with your life, and it feels quite a lot of pressure probably when you're like 17 of like which kind of avenue do you kind of partake. And I'd obviously kind of said no to the cadets and RAF and wasn't quite sure what to do with myself. And then a friend of mine, I think we were just sitting in the common room one day and just said, well, if you love music, and I wasn't, as much as I love playing music, I didn't think I wanted to be a performer. They just kind of mentioned, why don't you look into the music business side of things? And like I said, I don't think I'd ever really thought of music as a business. It always just felt like you either enjoy music or you're an artist. And I kind of forgot about that kind of the business side of it. So I think I just went and looked on all the applicable different courses you could do. And then I just discovered one music industry management course. And I just thought, yeah, great. I get to learn about the business side of music. I get to learn finance and A&R or studio work and a bit of everything. And that really kind of appealed to me at the time.
And so how did Columbia come about? How did working with A&R at Columbia come about?
I was at university, and I think I was about just finished my second year. And as much as I loved studying, I was just like, I wanted to get some tangible experience, like working as well. And through a friend of a friend, a role came up as a very junior A&R assistant at Columbia. So I would do like the hour trip into London 3 times a week, 4 times a week if they needed me, and just was willing to do anything, kind of get coffees, hunt through thousands of demos that people would go through and kind of tag what the type of style of the music was, and kind of get back to people if they were fortunate enough to ask them to send more music, or unfortunately send "I'm sorry but we're not interested" replies. A little bit of everything, and it was a really good eye-opening experience into the industry, just as a first kind of like taster of what the music business was about.
Yeah, amazing. And then into music supervision, and I think it's probably good to just define what is a music supervisor for anyone who is listening who isn't sure.
So a music supervisor is essentially the person who will help bring the creative vision of a creative or a director or an editor, and it will help them bring music into their creative vision. So whether that is by choosing music for them to add into a scene, by helping them commission some bespoke music, setting up kind of studio time and recording time with artists, doing all the licensing and budgeting for music. It is the kind of the whole kind of everything from the creative and the admin side surrounding adding audio and music to usually a visual picture, but these days it can be everything, kind of gaming, podcasts, but predominantly in film and TV.
Okay, great. And I think I'm going to ask the question because I'm conscious there's a lot of, I mean, we're going to dig into the sync world and how it's changed, but to your mind, for anyone out there who wants to get involved, because I get a lot of inquiries from people who want to get into the music industry, and quite often they are interested in the music supervision, or certainly the business side of things. What do you look for? Because obviously you will have hired people over the years, junior music supervisors. What do you think are the qualities that people need to show in order to get into the industry?
Yeah, really good question. I think, especially if you're starting out, a lot of the things can kind of be taught, but what you're really looking for is for someone who is obviously passionate about music, but also has quite a breadth of knowledge, or at least if not passion for different genres and styles of music, someone who can appreciate it and understand it really quite well. I wouldn't say I'm a connoisseur or like a really kind of expert on every genre or style of music, but I probably have listened to and I can appreciate and understand almost every style of music. And a lot of people do, say that because of the amount of music is out there in the world and people have varying tastes. But then also being able to imagine how that might work to picture. And having like a kind of Rolodex in your mind of different styles and subgenres of how that might actually reflect what you're being requested and how you might find that and search for that and kind of acquire that type of music. I often think being a kind of music supervisor or working with other music supervisors is that you're almost like a detective. So you have to be that kind of, you have to ask the probing questions of the people requesting things of you, of like, well, but what do you want your audience to feel? Or what journey do you want to take them on? What does the character want, or what would the character maybe want from in their history or background? How might they feel about that? So you're really kind of asking a few different questions to kind of get the kind of important bits from the people you're working with, and then you take that away and have to kind of go for that Rolodex of music and try and piece together what they might be looking for. So yeah, it's kind of a real good passion for music and film, TV, and just trying to understand how it all works together. I think that's what you got to ask someone when they're looking to get into the industry like that. And
obviously you have a background in music in that you played violin and then drums. Do you think being able to play a musical instrument is a prerequisite, or maybe not a prerequisite but an advantage?
Definitely an advantage, for sure. I don't think it is necessary. Some of the best music supervisors I've ever met and worked with, don't play an instrument. But a lot of people usually can pick up a guitar or an instrument or something and play it a little bit. I think it also helps as well when you're working with composers and not necessarily other music supervisors, and you're that kind of bridge between the creative and the film and the composer working on something or the artist working on something. You're talking more of a similar language. So even though you might not have the kind of minute details that a composer or an artist might have on how they curate the music, you're still distilling that information that you've got from the project or the person you're working with and passing that information across. But it's definitely not a prerequisite, but I think it would be an advantage for sure.
Sure. And it occurs to me as well when you were saying this, so you went and started working for Columbia whilst you were still at university. So by the time you finished university, everybody that's coming out of that course has the degree, but what sets you apart is that you've already gone and been doing work experience with a company. So that maybe gets you ahead of the pack in terms of having demonstrated a keenness to get involved and do stuff?
Yeah, I think also like when I've been hiring people who've worked in kind of university radio or hospital radios or anything like that, or done their own kind of like pirate radio things, that always stands out. People who've worked with their friends who are doing a film or kind of TV course or something, and they've kind of helped music supervise, their projects on the side. I think just being involved in the kind of creative industries that you're passionate about and just kind of doing them alongside any kind of like education, then it's always going to be a bonus, and you're always going to meet people and shake hands with people and kind of get into the same room as the right people who you'll eventually come round to meeting in the future. Very valuable.
And just on that subject, in a world where we are increasingly digital and communicate digitally via Zoom, and I'm very conscious that we're obviously doing this over Zoom as well, how important is it to get into the room and to meet with people face to face?
So much can be done on Zoom, so much or kind of on video calls. I can be. It's great that I can call Australia or LA and be chatting with people there, and it doesn't hinder any kind of work that you want to do. And obviously, during the pandemic, everything was locked down. I don't think I went into an office for almost 18 months, and we were super successful and did really well. But I just think there's always a difference to whether it's like an industry thing and you're meeting other supervisors or rights holders or anything like that, or going to sit in an edit suite with an editor and a director whilst they're cutting some music to a picture. You can convey so much more about what you want and what you need and explain so much better in a fraction of the time. And also I think a podcast is great because you have a bit more longer to kind of talk and discuss things. But sometimes when you're in a meeting, they're kind of short, sharp, 20 minutes. And that kind of little thing you might have had in person over a coffee, just as you're getting up to leave, you might be, oh, by the way, and you kind of bring up another aspect of it. You don't really have that in a kind of more kind of formulaic kind of video meeting thing. So I think you're obviously always going to have a bit more of the creative inspiration and aspect when you're working in person.
Under the skin. Obviously, you started at Universal 12 years ago, and prior to that, you were at BBC and Columbia Records. In that time, there's been some pretty major change. Obviously, with the record industry, all of a sudden, the revenue stream from CDs or selling physical copies has dried up. People are consuming music digitally, Spotify playlists, so the album isn't so much of a thing, it's more cherry-picking songs. Obviously then throw in the landscape of TV, which has changed, which streaming services, the renaissance, I suppose, of TV shows and the box set. I say it's not the renaissance of the box set, but the prevalence of the box set. Maybe less cinema getting made. With all of that thrown into the mix, how do you see that the sync landscape, and it's probably worth also qualifying what we mean by sync, but how has the sync landscape changed over time and to what it is today?
I think it's probably been through one of the most rapid periods of change that you kind of could imagine. That's been just as disruptive as, like you say, the decline of physical sales through CDs, the rise of streaming, the rise of the amount of content we consume, and the varying types of content we consume. When I first started at Universal, 2012 kind of era, we still had CDs on the wall, and we still had the websites and we were digitizing everything. But, I'd still go to ITN or Channel 4 and people would still have CDs that they could reference and everything. Whereas now I don't think anyone makes a CD anymore. I think we might make a nice vinyl compilation. That kind of whole era of how people find and consume music, and it works in the same as sync as it does with, if you're just a music consumer and listener yourself, you're kind of inundated with music that you could potentially use or listen to or enjoy. I think we're one of the most exciting periods of time, and also probably one of the most confusing at the same time, with just the volume of what we have. And that's not even getting near to any of the kind of AI discussions or protecting copyrights and artists and stuff, just from the volume of stuff that people have at their fingertips, and the ability for people to make content, whether that's their musicians or artists themselves, or independent filmmakers, user-generated content. We're kind of awash with ways to get whatever you make out there, and then opportunities to also monetize that. It's just, how do you do that, and the best ways to go about it. So, not sure that's a very concise answer, but it is a very different industry, I think, even in the 12 years. So yeah, it's trying to navigate that path. And obviously I've gone from kind of more of universal and production music into the indie world now, so representing indie artists and as a publisher and on the master side. And it's trying to, find new avenues for them to receive income and promote their work through sync, as the digital kind of streaming landscape is always changing as well.
Yeah. And how has your role changed from Universal to now being involved? How does your day-to-day differ?
I think the most fundamental change is kind of obviously moving from the production or library music world into the commercial sync world. So obviously, writing music specifically for use in film and TV, to now kind of finding opportunities for commercial artists for their work to be used in film and TV. I think I've even in the kind of library music world, I've worked very closely and had great relationships with many a composer over the years, and watched them go from composer to artist or artist to composer. So the two kind of worlds are kind of neatly intertwined. But what I like about kind of working with Involved and a little bit closer with some of the commercial artists is just, when you speak to them, they're creative people. They're always making music and probably have more music than they're ever going to release. So it's just always like talking to them about where they see their music and how they hope to have their music synced. I think sync is always seen as like a fun little holy grail for any kind of artist, of where they make it for themselves, but if it happens to get used on a kind of sports program or a trailer or in a cool feature film, then it's great to see their music used in a different capacity than they kind of ever imagined.
And I suppose that can also and has also provided a platform for their career to explode, because they all of a sudden get, with the ability of people, they can Shazam things, they can find that artist immediately, and all of a sudden people are like, wow, this artist is great. So as a discovery tool, that sync is invaluable. A
discovery tool, and also for like older catalogue, you don't have to look very hard for many examples of artists that have had a track from the 60s, 70s, 80s used in a popular TV show, and then before you know it, it's outstripping the most popular modern release and topping the charts for the next few years. So I think that kind of long tail of sync is what's really good, because you're always dictated by whatever the creative is asking you to find. And depending on the vision of the person you're working with, it could be a modern track, it could be, a Baroque track from the 1800s, it could be something that was released in the 70s. It just really depends on each individual project.
And something that occurred to me as well is, obviously with the way the digital world has revolutionised how we produce music. So, once upon a time, library music, you think back to Alan Hawkshaw, it was, you needed a studio to produce library music, whereas now the vast majority of composers will probably be working from home with setups in their bedrooms, which obviously means there's a lot more music out there. Does that make your job as a music supervisor infinitely harder, because there's exponentially more music to stay abreast of and listen to? Yeah,
I think it always does. Like, just working at Universal with their catalogue, you're talking, hundreds of thousands of tracks, and then working with Involved now, even with their catalogue, you're talking still tens of thousands. So you kind of have to be able to consume music in a different way than you would if you were ever kind of just listening to it for pleasure. So the art of speed listening. They also, like you say, the kind of like mini Rolodex in your head of where you go to when you need something. is a kind of, it's a different kind of skill when you're trying to kind of consume that amount of music out there. But it does make it very good. Like, it also gives you more opportunities when you're kind of looking for the perfect track with the volume of music out there. But I think kind of democratizing how music is made is always going to be probably a good thing. It's just, like you say, the volume of it and how you then find it and how do you source it and where do you store it all is the kind of complicated bit afterwards.
I think back in the early days when I was doing production music, there was an adage amongst those composers that you basically don't have an intro, almost start with the chorus, get in there quickly, because the idea was that anybody listening would be sort of skipping through the tracks quite quickly, so they might not listen. Whereas now, having sat next to editors, people have got a waveform, so they can actually quite easily jump through the track. Do you think the way that music is auditioned, well, I mean, obviously it is from that point of view, but do you see that noticeably, that the way that music is auditioned? And because you were sort of talking there about speed listening to music and how you process it, has that changed as a result of the digital world?
Oh, for sure. If you can see the waveform, like, and also I've worked with many a supervisor and editor where they just like, I know that it needs to be 60 seconds long and I want the first peak to be 20 seconds in and then a second crescendo to start at the 35 seconds in. And so they would look for that in waveforms. And I will often, if I'm pitching music as well, I will say, maybe disregard the first minute and a half because everything I think you'll need is going to be in the second half of the track there. So I think, yes, you've got to imagine that the piece of music as a whole is one thing, but when you're adding it to picture, what is a very specific part, or people might be stripping out stems and changing the track to fit what they need. So yeah, the way you audition music is slightly different to how you would ever just kind of consume it. And it's especially prevalent when you're pitching for a specific piece to picture. Often I'm pitching more about ideas and kind of concepts and themes and stuff, but you do have people saying, I've got this 3-minute scene or 2-minute scene and I need something that fits this very well.
And you've mentioned it briefly, and as much as I'm loath to talk about it, I feel it needs to be talked about. AI. I think from a personal point of view, there's a huge amount of resistance to AI, partly because it's potentially going to steal my job. But at the same time, it's kind of an inevitability. So I'm trying to embrace it and see how I can make it work for me rather than fighting it. How do you see AI changing the musical landscape?
There's so many different ways we can go with it. I think just from an overarching view, I see it as that it's already kind of been let out the bag and it is affecting the industry already, and multiple industries. How I would like it to be used is in a functional, productive way, as in it can be used for kind of tagging. It can be used in a kind of like a supportive way for the creative arts. But we already know that it is already being used to create kind of like copyright-free music. How it's trained on that is a different question. So I would always want it to be used as a supplemental way for people to kind of curate the music that they're doing. And I think we kind of need to embrace that kind of idea of it and maybe push for that as a function. And I'm sure there's other creative, interesting ways it can be used, whether people can hum or tap out a rhythm and then it can curate something. You can tell it, I want it to sound like a jazz kit or kind of a rock kit, and then it could create something that you've actually almost programmed it to do. I think there's ways that we should kind of try and inform the AI sphere to kind of do that for the creative person and try and move it away from scraping and curating music that people ultimately use or listen to, and therefore then not wish to pay for the creative talents of the people making music. And I think production music especially is kind of the easy kind of grasp for this, because you see production companies and agencies and stuff, their budgets are, even though they're creating more content, the the budgets they have to create that is going down, and one of the first things they always look to do is cut the kind of music budget, and that's where the production music world sits at the moment. And I just think it's quite an important ecosystem. I've known so many people that kind of started off in the production music world and then gone on to kind of launch their artist projects or become kind of composers and for film and TV, and that production music helped pay the bills and got them into the industry firsthand. And I think, it could be a scary point in 15 years' time where we don't have any new composers and talent being able to kind of like cut their teeth in the production music world before they're able to launch themselves into kind of the kind of score and feature composer kind of world.
And something else that has occurred to me as well, I suppose, is backtracking ever so slightly. Obviously, with production music, primarily for composers, it's all about there's the mechanical fee, but then there's also the royalties from the whichever collection society in whichever country, UK PRS, US ASCAP, BMI. Obviously, that's been the lion's share, but we're increasingly seeing the digital world in more and more, as you mentioned, user-generated content, more and more music being used in user-generated content online. And I would imagine there's probably more music used online than there is on television. However, still there's a weighting in terms of royalties for composers towards TV. Do you think that balance will ever equalise, or is it forever going to be Spotify and YouTube? You're getting 0.00047 pence per play, or will that playing field ever even out?
I would hope so. But it's trying to again get people to understand the value of music, especially some of the tech companies, and then how they try and disassociate themselves from the content that is on their platforms versus how actually the music and the content they're making is helping build those platforms. So I think hopefully maybe through some of the streamers and kind of your Netflixes and your Apples and stuff there, those kind of royalty rates and the payments from those will increase over time. I think it's always going to be hard for the kind of more disposable content and the kind of short form content that you see online to kind of ever be monetized at the same kind of weighting as those more kind of traditional sync fields. Hopefully, if you with technology, if you can make it easier and that every kind of use can be picked up, that if you're having multiple uses, then you can pick up multiple more uses of your music being used. Then you might be able to kind of economies of scale, be able to kind of monetize that easier. Through audio recognition technologies and blockchain for paying people and everything. But I think we're still a way off. The music industry is a very complicated with so many rights and different people and companies involved. The content industry is complicated in that aspect. So trying to kind of pull all those different strands together is quite a tricky way to make sure that money is going to the right places, for sure.
Sure. And I seem to remember as well, there was a bit of a standoff between Universal and TikTok, wasn't there, regarding music rights, that TikTok, I can't remember, I did hear about it, but I can't remember what it was, but weren't TikTok, they ended up cutting music because they weren't prepared to negotiate and pay fair rates to artists and rights holders.
I think it's just, I think at the time it was more Universal and some other kind of music companies were saying your kind of the royalty that you pay is fractional compared to Spotify, let alone anything else. But your platform is built upon music, so there should be. But then it's such a good discovery tool for a lot of people these days, and it can it has broken artists as well at the same time. Everyone from kind of signed artists to bedroom composers and artists at the same time. So it's a kind of a fractious ecosystem where they kind of both like each other and hate each other at the same time. But they, as will usually happen, they came to a common agreement on what should happen, and it was all resolved. But yeah, I think there's always going to be that butting of heads between kind of technology and then the traditional creative agencies of trying to make sure you uphold to the kind of creative weight and deserving income of the creators versus people trying to push technology forward and utilize all this kind of content that's out in the world, and how do you make sure you pay everyone fairly?
Yeah. And you alluded to, when you were talking about AI, you alluded to the idea that if it can be leveraged from a production point of view, hopefully making processes more efficient behind the scenes. In terms of generative AI creating, where do you stand on the idea that, in 5-10 years' time, AI could be creating music as well as composers for a fraction of the cost and at speed and at volume?
From the first kind of bits I saw of it, kind of 5-6 years ago to where it is now, it is drastically better, and I don't think you'll probably be able to escape the kind of how well it will be able to recreate what a human can do. But I'm still firmly on the point of that people will always look or desire kind of like authenticity from their artists. They want a story behind them. They want to know the person behind making it. I'm sure there's going to be whole swathes of people who don't care and they just want to put on this playlist whilst they're cooking or sleeping, and there's whole subsets of the music industry that kind of work in that space. But I think, and this is what I hope working for an independent publisher now, is that people are looking for authenticity and real kind of people and stories and artists at the same time. So I think, yes, it probably will be able to recreate music in a way that kind of replicates what human artists can do. But I would hope that the other creators in the industry, the editors, the directors, and the consumers will still be looking for the real people behind it, and that will probably outweigh the volume of the generative AI music that will inevitably be coming our way.
Yeah, that's interesting. Years ago, I wrote an article on the importance of branding in music, because I think for me, music is always about it creates emotion in a moment, and I don't have to think too much about it. It just, either I like it or I don't. The same with a piece of visual art. I will look at something, and the difference with visual art is I couldn't necessarily tell you why I like one piece of art and not another. But I think over the years I've started to realise there is the importance of branding in terms of what you're talking about. And it sounds like to your mind, that branding is really important. Would that also be the case for... Because obviously for artists, there's always been a brand and there's always been branding behind that. But does that extend through to composers, do you think?
I 100% think so. I think the more you can give people information about yourself, where you come from, what you're interested in, especially kind of sync industry, it's all about relationships, and then people trusting each other, and then also feeling that they know the person that they're working with a little better. So even if you're not directly working with that artist or composer, if they know that you're a huge Leeds United fan, or if you are, if you particularly have worked well in certain types of advertising before for like a sports brand or anything like that, the more people know about you, trust you, have an idea of who you are and what you like, and I think it was always kind of add that kind of, that's the authentic element, the person behind creating it, and that they might have a little bit more interest, or they might have some more stock in what you are trying to create because they believe or trust or follow the same kind of thing that you're trying to create at the same time.
Yeah. It makes me think of the coffee analogy, which is, essentially Starbucks, Costa, Nero, and all the independent coffee outlets, they all essentially do the same thing. They add hot water to coffee. The thing that differentiates them is the story that people tell themselves about being the person who drinks coffee from Starbucks, or who... So I personally would always shun Starbucks in favour of an independent coffee outlet. But then on some level, I'm telling myself a story about that I'm the kind of person that likes that indie coffee outlet, whereas simultaneously, someone else might be telling themselves a story like they are the sort of person that drinks coffee from Starbucks. And it's, how do you differentiate when the product is essentially coffee and water? How do you differentiate yourself? And it's in that story, it's in that branding, which is, it's interesting.
And you see that with brands and TV channels and everyone now, is that you're all kind of selling a similar product, and then they use the audio kind of branding as a way to kind of separate themselves and find that audience and entice people in, or coffee chains again, they're what kind of witty saying have they got, or how they're going to tap into that nostalgic moment of you being a kid in the 90s or something like that. So it's all about trying to find your niche and how do you use that in the quickest way possible with short attention spans or the volume of content and stuff as well. So
absolutely. Great. And I am, by the way, a big Leeds United fan. Getting a taste. Are there some seminal artists or bands that have helped shape you today in terms of what you like and what you create?
For sure. I don't know if they necessarily it's just the kind of artists or the kind of pieces of content that I kind of watched where I just thought, this is great, and I love music and I love how it's always used. So I remember hearing everything from, there was a band called Reuben, that was kind of like, this was like late 90s, early 2000s, and it was a kind of more of like the burgeoning kind of like indie rock kind of emo scene around both the US and the UK. There was bands called Million Dead and Headers for Heroes. And so after my kind of classical kind of upbringing, I kind of transitioned quite hard into this kind of like more rock and indie world. And I loved that. I thought it was great. I thought it was completely different, especially growing up in Devon. It was cool to see all these bands come down to Exeter and just be able to kind of go to cool kind of rock gigs and stuff. So I love that a lot. Actually, there was a kind of skateboarding video that came out in the early 2000s called Yeah Right, and it was for a brand called Girl Skateboarding. And I remember watching that with some friends. It must have been like about 16 or so. And it was like an hour-long skate video, but they had this incredible soundtrack of music going through it at the same time. So I think they had everything from, I remember hearing La Tigre, Decepticon, and I remember hearing like that kind of like whole Riot Girl it kind of style of music, but they also had like Public Enemy and Ghostface Killer, Death in Vegas, Joy Division. And I just remember looking this is a skate video, but they've got this incredible soundtrack going on, and it kind of went, someone's chosen that. And it's not just in the background or done as like on a whim. It's actually someone's chosen all these different tracks, and I thought that's incredible. And I think that's probably what first idea of being a music supervisor was about. And also, I don't know if you ever watched the series Band of Brothers. It's got the composer Michael Kamen in it, and from like a kind of score point of view, then once I heard his kind of like intro to that, I kind of looked up everything he'd done, realizing he'd scored some of all my favorite movies throughout the years, from everything from your Die Hards and Lethal Weapons to kind of like License to Kill and The Iron Giant and all these kind of like iconic 90s movies and stuff. So, yeah.
Well, it speaks to as well the idea that I always think that, visuals are very powerful, music's very powerful, but there's a strange synergy happens when the two are combined. And that, speaks to when you're talking about the skateboarding videos. Like, those skateboarding videos are cool and it's cool footage, but it's the music adds so much to it. And similarly, the music's great, but having the visuals almost provides an identity or personality to the music. And then similarly with Band of Brothers, it's such an emotive series. Not least because at the end of each episode, you end up having a conversation with, or you end up meeting the soldiers that are the actual soldiers that are being portrayed in the series. But that score adds so much richness and emotion to the visuals. So yeah, it's interesting that synergy, but then obviously this is what music supervision is. It's marrying up the visuals with the music and creating a greater emotional impact as a result.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you will always, music especially, but music to picture. You are you watching your favorite movie or cartoon? Anything you could probably kind of hook like an enjoyment or like a memory to that, and that's because of those working so well together. So I think when watching those things when I was younger, I didn't even realise it was a job or what people are doing, but it's obviously kind of like stuck in my brain somewhere about, that's a kind of cool part of the industry, and you don't realise what effect it has on you at the same time. And then, afterwards I would go away and find an old Public Enemy CD and start playing that out really loud, and it gives you the opportunity to find new music that you would have never listened to, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think that, because when you're saying, so obviously whoever was choosing the music for those skateboard videos, it would probably have boiled down to what works to picture, but also what the editor or director likes. And I suppose would be synonymous with the scene at the time, because I remember watching a lot of ski videos, and it was also quite a lot of the hardcore stuff, like Offspring, and I can't remember the name of the other bands. But does that feed into the idea that music supervisors will also, because obviously you have a broad understanding and broad tastes, but if you sort of drill down, there are certain things that you would particularly gravitate towards. Does that then influence, as a music supervisor, what potentially at times what sort of music you might gravitate towards?
Yeah, probably. I think you're predisposed to kind of leaning on what you might like best or know best. I think that's definitely will always kind of happen out of like habit more than anything else. I think, like you say, you're always trying to help the person making this piece of creative work, whatever it is. You're trying to help them find their vision, though. So you kind of do have to put your tastes and feelings aside, because you're there to supplement their work, not necessarily add yours in. So I think where my kind of tastes usually come in would be a wild card option, right? So they've asked for this style of music, you send them 6 or 7 tracks, but then you say, but I've also included this track as an additional idea, just because in my head, when I'm visualizing it, it could happen. But I also think, and predominantly, as much as I have been a kind of music supervisor per se, I've also kind of predominantly working for as a music rights holder, so on behalf of so I don't necessarily have the full gamut of all music ever. I'm often tasked with finding opportunities for the catalogue or the artists or the repertoire that I'm looking to find. Someone might have a reference of an artist they like, and then in my head I'm like, right, so they like this particular artist, where would that match to this catalogue of music that I do have access to? And then that's where your kind of understanding of the catalogue and being able to decipher the style of music that they've given you as the reference, and then distill it into what you might also have on hand. And that's the kind of skill there, where you can kind of find something that does the same job or does the job better in some respects. And you've got to be able to kind of offer that as an option.
Sure. And does that predisposition to certain tastes in music extend to directors? So, for example, if you're working with a director to find music for whatever it is, that you will lead in, if you better understand their tastes. That's not to say that the music that they like would work to this, but understanding their taste might go some way to understanding what music you could put forward that they would like.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's why I think I always enjoy, if you can get into the process of what is being created as early as possible. So if you can go and sit with a director or an editor whilst they've just got the script, or once they've got the first run of visuals back, and they're still going through the rushes and kind of cutting it down to a very loose version of the first cut, it's really good to be involved at that point and then discuss what music they like, what vision they have, and how they see the kind of project developing, because then you can discount maybe 80% of what you thought they might want. So I've worked on documentaries before where it's a kind of natural history kind of animal-based documentary, and you think your big kind of cinematic orchestral scores, and then someone's gone, I don't want to do that at all, I want an electronic score. And so therefore you think what you stereotypically might use or think people might want to use, you then discount that straight away, and you go, right, how can I build a palette that's going to tell the story about this animal or this country or this continent, but through electronic music rather than your traditional orchestral score. So
yeah, and I suppose if you know that director particularly loves the Venga Boys or Two Unlimited, then you know that your sort of music along those lines could go down well.
Then or you're up against a very hard opportunity trying to make that even come to life, let alone finding the right options.
Really? Okay. Yeah, I think it seems to me. I always think when working with a director, it's very much a collaboration. But 50% of the battle or the challenge, for want of a better term, is understanding that vision, getting under the skin of what they're trying to achieve and what they want to do, and then the other 50% is actually then the provision of music, which in my case would be writing a bespoke piece, and in your case finding the right tracks to support it.
I think also especially if you're working as like a music rights holder, you're in this funny kind of position where you are deeply passionate about the music and you are pitching this artist and this catalogue and you think it'd be perfect, but it doesn't necessarily match what the creative vision of the music supervisor you're working with as well at that point. So you then have to kind of tell the story of that artist and that piece of music, of why you think it might also work and stuff. So you can also contribute in other ways. And that's why it's a real collaborative process of just trying to really understand the kind of what you're trying to say and the best way to kind of make the audience feel a specific way. And then, finding everyone working together to find the best way to do that.
Very much a collaboration at all points. Right, well then, I'd like to finish up, Sam, with some quick-fire questions. The first one being, what's your favourite biscuit?
Favourite biscuit is a tough one. I think I'm going to go pure nostalgia and go, you might kind of veto this option, but it's a Club. Do you remember the Club biscuits?
I would never veto a Club. Orange Club or...
I would almost always go orange first, but I'm not against like a mint one either. I think I've always got old memories of having them. Like if you go and give blood these days in the UK, it's like a little orange squash and a Club biscuit afterwards. And my mum was a nurse, so I used to go and do that as a kid. So I've had them as a kid, and then also if I go and donate blood now, or you occasionally see them. You don't really see them in shops anymore, do you? You have to go out and specifically buy them. So they're kind of a real kind of niche kind of...
Or apparently go to a blood bank. It's weird that the blood banks have somehow frozen in time and are still providing it. I imagine it was a Capri Sun and an Orange Club. It's like my 90s school packed lunch.
Yeah, I think I go back about 30 years every time I go and have one of those. It's pure nostalgia. I love it.
Yeah. I do. The only issue I would take with Club, particularly the orange and the mint ones, is if you put them in a biscuit tin with other biscuits, they tend to taint them, so then everything else after that ends up tasting of either chocolate or mint or both, which I can't go on board with that, Sam.
Yeah, that's fair enough. It's just two separate tins.
Keep us separate in a sort of like a hazmat bag or something on the side.
Yeah, for sure.
Second quick fire question. What is it? Little known fact about Sam Stockham.
Well, I've kind of alluded to it, but yeah, I don't think always people know that I played violin and viola for a number of years. I think I played them for about 8 to 10 years at the time. Got to do my kind of like, I think about grade 6s, I think I got to in the end. Played and then transitioned hard to the drums and then played them for kind of my indie rock and emo years. So yeah, kind of like the heady days of being in an orchestra and then in many a kind of bad but really fun kind of pop band at the same time.
Yeah. Was the transition to drums because they were cooler?
Yeah, pretty much. I think so. I think I used to love playing in orchestra, right? I used to love going, but I just didn't really like practicing by myself as much. So when you got the full orchestra together, it was great. But then, being about 15, your friends are starting to pick up guitars, and someone needed a drummer, and I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I can do that. So that was that. So, but yeah, it's a great time, right, to go and play and in bands with friends, even if you're just doing it for like a battle of the bands or like a kind of university show or something like that, just to be out there kind of having fun and playing some covers incredibly badly is still a good time.
Yeah. And do you think bands will come back? Because there's definitely been a decline in the number of bands that you sort of see in... Well, I mean, it's mainly the chart music, but it just feels like, certainly for labels, it's a lot less of an investment. You don't have to pay for a studio and a band to go in and record stuff if you're sort of home-based music producers. Do you think bands will come back? Will we see a return?
100%. I think people always say, if you read an Instagram comment or a YouTube comment on a band from the 80s or something like that, we're like, there's never music like this anymore. There is, it's just there's so much more music to consume. So I think, I went on at the end of the year, I went on a bit of a flurry buying different gig tickets. And when I look back, they were almost all kind of band-based ones. A band called The Big Special, a band called The Viagra Boys. I'm also going to see Alexis on Fire, Deftones and Weezer. Again, that's a bit more of a throwback. They're playing a show together. But then there's a few other kind of like indie bands that come in over from Australia that I'm going to go see. So I think it'll always be there. It's just you've got to kind of maybe, like I say, it's not going to be reflected in the charts so much. So you've got to go out and hunt out these kind of cool new smaller bands and really, really go and support them at a smaller venue, not necessarily at your kind of... They're not going to pay at the bigger venues as much anymore.
Yeah. And I suppose there's just a magic, isn't there, of watching people make music together.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's always going to my go-to is kind of like the indie rock stuff. But I think going to see any live music, going to watch some classical music, going to watch a DJ, but DJ live, and who's someone who can really kind of select a great set list and mix it all together really well. Just going and experiencing live music in whatever form you choose it to be is always probably the greatest experience.
Yeah. And as much as anything, it's the energy of being amongst the people enjoying it. I always think that with a football match as well. You've got 40, 50,000 people in a stadium together. There's just there's an energy to that which you only get from sort of mass groups of people coming together and focusing on either football, music, whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you still play?
No, I don't. I think people always ask, you could pick it up again, but like I kind of, once I put down the stringed instruments at about age 16, I don't think I picked them up again ever. And maybe tried them again, and I played the drums for a bit. And then when I moved to London, it's not conducive to have a drum set in a flat in London, so I sold those at one point, and no, I haven't played since. So rusty would be an understatement. Terrible would probably be the outcome.
I'm sure it's like riding a bike. I'm sure you'd be able to pick it up pretty quickly. What scares you?
What scares me? I think when I was younger, nothing much. Innocence of youth and a bit of stupidity. But I think as you get older, I wouldn't say anything particularly scares me, but I'm more aware of what could go wrong or have more like worldly worries about things. So I don't know if it's necessarily that I have a specific fear. Like I don't particularly like heights, but I'm not scared of them. I don't particularly want to go on. Survivor, and then going to have to crawl through like a coffin full of spiders or anything. But I wouldn't say I'm scared of it. I think it's just more of like being more aware of your surroundings and just all the things that potentially could go wrong. It's just very middle-aged and just worrying about all the little things, probably a bit too much.
And what would be top of that list if you just sort of like go, okay, of all the things that could potentially happen to me or the world or whatever, what do you reckon is the biggest threat?
Oh God, that's
or the biggest fear factor.
I'm just worried about the general inability of people just to get on, and just how much people like hate each other and are so angry all the time. I don't think anything is like, have your opinions and have what you like about each other, but people's thoughts that their opinion is so much better or stronger than someone else's, and I'm going to have to impact your life with my opinion on that. I think there should be a much better way where people can all just get on and live their lives without having to kind of hate and oppress and kind of give this such a negative feeling on everything. I think we should be concentrating on much bigger things in going on in the world, rather than these kind of what seem to me relatively insignificant, but people kind of make it their whole doctrine and their personality to kind of impress upon someone else. That just seems quite scary and sad to me at the same time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. I do sometimes, I think my theory is that it's the online world which has created this sort of dichotomy between hard left, hard right, right, wrong, very, very polarizing, without any real recognition of kind of like the million degrees of nuance between either side, and the fact that it's okay for someone to have a different opinion to you, and you can still respect and value them as a human being.
I think what's worrying as well is that that used to be mainly online, but now it's kind of permeating into like real life, and I'm just like, that's not how it, like if you go to the pub or a coffee shop and you just sit and talk with most people for an extended period of time, you'll have way more in common than you do that you don't have in common together. So, but we're just not willing to give the time to ever get to that point, and everyone's kind of like throwing the anchor out and deciding that the world needs to stop because I'm right, and then I just don't think it quite works like that.
No, absolutely not. Oh, here's hoping that we do see a shift in that as well. And final question, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I think I would have just said, trust your gut. If you think it's a good idea, take the chance, or believe in yourself when you're creating something, or make the move, or anything like that. Just, I think sometimes self-doubt can get in the way, and sometimes your first idea is a great idea. So yeah, trust your gut, and really kind of, and that could also be, leave something behind, and if it's a bad idea, go leave it along and come back to it later. But yeah, just whatever's usually what your first kind of intuition is on something, maybe listen a little bit harder.
Yeah, absolutely. That reminds me, it's sort of the idea behind Malcolm Gladwell and Blink is that, when weighing up options or thinking about things, we know very, very quickly what the right thing to do is, but then we tend to rationalize too much and tie ourselves in knots. And there's a paradox of choice as well with having so much choice, but actually, yeah, trusting your gut and going with that first instinct is usually the right one. What a wonderful note to end the podcast on. So, Sam, thank you so much for taking the time to chat. It's been fascinating insights into the sync world and the music landscape, and how it has changed and how it may change again. Involved, where can people find you if they want to sort of find out a bit more about Sam Stockham?
Very boringly, you could probably just go on the LinkedIn and type in my name, and I'm probably anything kind of work related. I'm there. I've kind of avoided social media a bit. I'm more of like a lurker than actually doing anything on there. And then for anything involved publishing, or like you say, the Anjuna labels. It's a big year for the labels. We've got lots of new music coming out, celebrating the 25th anniversary of Anjunabeats. So hopefully you'll hear lots of our artists out in the world DJing, and also across lots of film and TV. So
awesome. Well, I'll put a link to involved and Anjuna related stuff in the show notes. Sam, thanks again.
Pleasure, mate. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, and given that you've listened this far, I feel you might have, then I would be honoured and incredibly grateful if you could take a moment to subscribe, rate and review on your podcast platform of choice. By subscribing, you'll automatically be notified each time a new episode drops, and by rating the show, you tell the artificial intelligence that will soon be running the world that this podcast is worth listening to. I certainly get a lot of insights and value from these conversations, and I genuinely hope you do too. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, then you can email me, podcast@larpmusic.com. Larpmusic.com is my digital abode, and the home of the podcast is larpmusic.com/Sync Music Matters Podcast. And Sync Music Matters Podcast is hyphenated. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.